Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another round of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I'm your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher, and we have a real treat today. Jill James is with us. Jill, I think you're the Chief Safety Officer for HSI. And Jill and I actually met at an OHS Leader Summit where she was the Mistress of Ceremonies. I don't even know what it's called anymore.
I'll go with Master of Ceremonies or MC.
Yeah, the MC, and did a fantastic job. But I also brought to the table her leadership characteristics. So I immediately asked her if she wouldn't mind coming on the podcast, and she graciously accepted. Jill, tell everybody who you are and what you do, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Rob. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been in the EHS profession for 29 years, which sounds like bananas when I think back to that long ago. I am from Minnesota in the United States. You can probably hear that in my accent. I get asked a lot if I'm Canadian or if somewhere in the Midwest. And I've worked my whole career in Minnesota. So many years ago, I earned my Master of Industrial Safety degree at the University of Minnesota. And then my family, since I was the first person to graduate college in my family, would ask often, like, what kind of job can you get with that? What kind of job can you get with that? And I'd say, I don't know. I suppose I could work for a place like OSHA. And so I'm finishing up my graduate studies. I'm doing an internship with the Department of Military Affairs. And my first supervisor from an internship I did at the end of undergrad school in safety for the Department of Transportation calls me up and he says, "Hey, kid," because that's what everybody called me because I was, "Hey, kid, OSHA is hiring. You should apply for the job." And I'm like, okay, okay. And so I did, and I got hired by OSHA in the state of Minnesota and spent the first just about 12 years as an investigator in the state, doing investigations of both industrial construction sites and general industry sites, and had geographic locations where I was responsible for doing my inspections, and specialized in a couple of areas. Was asked to be part of something called an ergonomics team for a while, where we targeted doing first education and then inspections in the meatpacking industry and in the long-term care facilities, because they both have such high rates of musculoskeletal injuries. And I've done, unfortunately, a lot of death investigations, a lot of serious injury investigations. And then when I felt like my career needed to have a shift, I went into private industry, which is where I've been ever since. So I started out in healthcare for a while. No, that's not. Yes, healthcare was the first stop. See, 29 years, I'm trying to remember. Worked in healthcare for a while in support of a large regional medical clinic establishment, and then went into higher ed for a little while, and then in support of the poultry industry, specifically turkeys and all of the ancillary services and businesses that support turkeys. So from egg production, which are called breed and grow farms and egg farms, to slaughterhouses and all the stops between, including engineering firm that produces equipment that does things like blunts the beaks on little birds so they can't peck each other, and gives them vaccines and all that business.
Truly cradle to grave, but
cradle to grave for sure. Absolutely. And then I started with HSI. I was a customer of theirs first, and then became an employee 9 years ago in support of HSI, making
tell us
workplaces
a little bit
safe.
about HSI and what they do. I
Yeah.
found it interesting because you and I shared a common individual that we didn't really know we shared. I think it'd be interesting for folks to hear what HSI does.
Yeah, so HSI is a software company, and it is a software company that has, as I like to explain it for EHS professionals, 3 platforms, but they're all one in terms of single sign-on for EHS professionals and their employees to do the 3 things that we all need to do. And so one is an LMS, so learning management system, with all of the content that you can imagine for compliance-based training, as well as refresher training, just-in-time training, oodles of content that can sit on our learning management system or someone else's. And then the second piece is an EHS platform. So EHS platform would be things as simple as the OSHA 300 log and all of the pieces and parts therein, to as complex as maybe a JSA, and all the stops in between: checklists, audits, inspections, asset management, contractor management. And we could fill an hour talking about the flex of that piece of software to help people like us do our jobs, and then also get it into the hands of employees, so it's so that we're not the only people doing the work. And then the last piece of that is SDS management. And so as simple as the SDS old-fashioned binder, except it's not a binder, it's electronic, to as complex as chemical management. So when a new drum of something lands at the receiving dock, it needs to have that cradle to grave responsibility through the life of the company. And so our software helps employers manage that.
That's great. It makes one of the things that we do in the human and organizational performance space, we talk about making the right thing easier to do and the wrong thing harder to do. Right. And I think that you guys create products and systems that really fit that, where an organization can run around like crazy trying to do things that need to be done. They need to be done by regulation, or they need to be done because they need to be done. They can either spend the time trying to do that their way, or be able to do it a right way and get away with it. I mean, you and I were having a conversation, during COVID, we always wanted the ability of smaller organizations to be able to use, and us to scale down to smaller organizations, because that's where most of the people get hurt, maimed, and killed. Is organizations under 100 people, but they could never afford what we did, and probably to some extent what you guys do. And the ability to scale that so that it impacts the people that are hurt, maiming, and killing 80% of the people in the US and Canada, that became an important node. And I think you guys did some of that over COVID as well, right?
Yeah, we did. I mean, it's particularly with the EHS platform that I was just mentioning, we created something called EHS Essentials. And so that it was targeting that smaller market with, those essential modules that every employer has to have, and the things that we all must do in terms of identifying hazards and correcting hazards in our workplace, and reporting incidents, injuries, near misses, and keeping track of our assets and making our observations so we can do corrective things. And, as I kept looking at that, I'm like, yes, for small companies, yes, but this scales to large companies too, especially for those of us in our profession who maybe just took a new position somewhere in a larger organization where they're not as familiar with the technology that's available for our industry right now. And maybe you need to come in with a budget request that's something that's more palatable for a leadership team, so you can prove the value of it and get started in a smaller capacity. And we were doing some training with our team yesterday, and we were specifically talking about our observations module. And I was telling our sales team, I said, as a practitioner in my last organization, I didn't have a piece of technology for observations. And so I would be going from place to place, location to location, state to state, to do various pieces and parts of my work, and I would see something that needed to be addressed, or I'd see something that needed to be celebrated, or I'd see something that needed to be corrected. And I would, come back with my pockets and bags full of little notes, or a notebook page full of things, or an email, or a picture that I took on my phone. And then you get back to your office and go, okay, no, I've got to follow up on all these things,
Like putting together a crossword or not
it is,
a
right?
jigsaw puzzle.
Right. And so I would have loved to have had an observations module then to simplify my work and get things addressed and passed on to people a lot faster than our industry in particular, I think, has always been like a couple centuries behind every other professional practice. And it's not that the technologies don't exist for us. They do. We just haven't had the opportunity to move with them. Our counterparts in payroll have been using optical scanners or fingerprint scanners for a long time for people to clock in, and we're still putting VHS tapes and things or sticking pieces of paper in our pockets and trying to track stuff. But the
brilliant.
technology exists.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and part of that, I sit on the Safety Science Advisory Board for a university. And part of that is the academic side isn't really advancing through research and application the where we need to go. So the first time somebody starts to get caught up is when they get out into the workplace, and then they're overwhelmed with all the stuff that they need to do.
Yeah.
And so somebody really has to jump off and do some of the things that both of our organizations have done, and just knuckle down and develop things. And then you have to convince people that this thing will help you do what you're trying to do in a better way.
That's right. And it needs to be done in concert with everyone in an organization, which is where that gift of that software in everyone's hands, where everyone's got a mobile device and can be doing more things in real time, or getting training in real time, or scanning a QR code to be able to get their SDS, or to be able to get this just in time, like here's the procedure to be able to have access to this stuff, rather than something that's the whole historic locked in a cabinet or in a dusty 3-ring binder. I saw lots of dusty 3-ring binders in my life with OSHA.
Right. Have you run into this challenge? And I spend all of my time, probably the same as you, all of my time with senior leaders. So I do get to go down and talk to the field every now and then, but mostly our consultants are dealing with the managers and supervisors and the people in the field and the advocates. I'm sitting there talking one-on-one to the C-suite and the senior leaders and the vice presidents of the company. And one of the questions that I ask is, do you have a mobile phone policy? And if you do, what is it? And it's almost always, don't use it. So, okay, what's that mean? What does that mean to somebody today? If you ask someone today what time it is, they don't look at their wrist. Right. They look at their phone. So is that using it? If you say an all-inclusive, don't use it, and yet the very best software that you can use to manage the situation is on their phone, how do you put those two things together and make them part of your vision and values, instead of a phone is a distraction and you shall not use it? Do you guys run into that at all with your as a challenge? Yeah,
it depends on the industry. And I think that industries who are really thoughtful are thinking about what those applications are going to be. Because let's say you're in an industry where you can't have sparking devices.
Right.
I'm thinking of down the road from me is a sugar beet processing company, and they have specific places in the plant where you can't have any sparking devices because it's an explosion hazard. And so then what do you do? And so we have customers who are using maybe tablets that are devices, or intrinsically safe devices, or maybe they're positioning tablets in locations that are accessible to employees so that they don't have to use maybe even their personal device, because maybe a company has a policy that they don't support people's personal devices, and it costs money for the user, for the employee to use them. And so we do see employers using tablets, those kind of things that are specifically placed within companies. I also know organizations, to speak to your question on all mobile devices are dangerous. I've got a friend in the zoo and aquarium industry who had to write a policy about not using their employees not using their mobile device while walking.
Right.
because they had so many injuries with people running into things or tripping on something or slipping on something because walking with their head down, and so they had to do a company policy on that.
Well, it's interesting that we then start turning those things into policies instead of figuring out other ways that we can manage these things related to human nature that have popped up over the years that we have to manage as a human nature characteristic, not as an individual thinking about whether they're violating or not violating a rule.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point. And I think back in my career, and when I first started as that kid, as people called me, and I took my first job with OSHA, and I had all of these, my first mentors were people who had been working at OSHA or working in industry since like the year I was born,
Right.
And when the laws were being written. And so I would always ask, like, what's the why behind this one? Like, what's the why behind this? And so many of us know that so many of these regulations, whether they came from consensus, building places, or OSHA wrote them themselves over time. And I've authored a law in Minnesota as well. They're written in blood, nearly all of them, right? And so I have felt always that my work as a practitioner is to always explain the why. And if I didn't understand the why, then what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Like a joke, one of my early mentors with OSHA said, we used to have a law in the books. He'd tell me that we had to have split rim toilet seats. Okay, I mean, that every public restroom you've ever been in has a split rim toilet seat. And it was a law on the OSHA books. And when I started with OSHA, it wasn't there anymore. And I'd say, Dale, what was it? Like, what was the why behind it? He didn't know either. And I still don't know the answer to that. And I've always
no.
I'm sorry, Rob.
You were going to tell me why.
I'm sorry, Rob. Maybe the listeners, somebody's going to know it and can write it in. But every time that I would do an investigation or in private sector, when I would be identifying an unsafe work practice or an unsafe condition, I felt it was always 100% on me to explain the why behind it. Right. Not because I said so, not because there's a law. Yes, there might be a law, but here's why.
So that's interesting because, we do a lot of work with personality diversity, and we use Equilibria Z colors, but only because they've got 1.6 million data points on how different people with different personalities see and manage risk differently.
Yeah, right.
So you have this natural thing, which 1/4 of the top 4 personalities have, that this need to know why. Yeah. But 3 of the 4 major personality types, that's not their first question. So you have people that their first question is what, and once you get the answer to what, they'll figure out their own why and how. You've got people whose first question is how, and if you don't give them a method, they'll develop one before they are ready to move. Yep. You've got people who are who people. All they got to know is who they're working with, and they'll adjust everything that they do for that group. And then you've got people that are why people. And a lot of times people say that, well, everyone's really a why person. No. There are certain groups that's the first element, but for the rest of them, we have to, for everything critical, we have to explain the who, the what, the how, and the why. And we tell people, don't lead with the what, because you got a lot of doers out there that if you lead with the what, you're never going to hear anything else about what's going on. They're already out there working while everybody else is trying to get the rest of the information. Yeah. But I think that's great that you have, when you pull the why up in the conversation, then I think it increases alignment both individually and organizationally. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I would explain the why, and when I still do, it is more to do with trying to really impact that person, that human being on their own, like this is what can happen to you, or this is what can happen to your team, the people that you work with.
Yeah.
You laid out a beautiful pattern there. I'm thinking about all of the times that I would be, standing in front of, I don't know, a punch press or a shear or something with machine guarding. And in my role with OSHA, I would take out my O10 gauge. Are you familiar with the O10
Yeah.
gauge? Yeah. And I would, I'd start with that and I'd say, okay, now let's look at this. Let's look at where the blade is or the point of operation or whatever. And I'd take out my O10 gauge and then I'd put the O10 gauge along my arm. I said, this is what this represents. See right here. That's what this is. And now we're going to measure together if that guard is low enough or far enough back to keep you from getting caught in here, to keep you from getting your fingers amputated, da, da, da. And then people would be like, everybody would be looking like, let's see if we can figure this out. And then I'd be like,
Yeah.
okay, so it's not right. And then I'd say, how could we do this? Is it possible to make it this? Or is it possible to do this? And then everybody would be standing around, and you become part of the solution, right?
Right. And that
And
solution
yeah,
always comes from the people doing the work.
100%.
We have to open their mind
100%. Yeah.
to the ability to provide that input, again, within the reasoning behind whatever regulation or whatever requirement they're trying to do. Because you may have that out and you're showing it to people, and then all of a sudden they say, yeah, but Joe, you don't understand.
Right.
The adjustment knob is in there.
Yep.
That has to be wide enough so we can adjust it. And you and I would say, whoa.
Oh,
No, that's not the why. They say, well, then why did they put the adjustment knob in there? And we're thinking, great question. Because if now the system forces them to go into someplace you're measuring that they shouldn't even go in, that whole design element, they can then help us fix that piece. So we have all kinds of stories about things exactly about the way you're talking about.
Yep. I love to be able to I learned to pay attention to things that were like homemade tools. I might be going through a facility and I'd see a broom handle, a stick, a piece of wire, something with duct tape on it that was laying up on top of something somewhere. And then I'd ask, okay, so now what do you use this tool for? Because it was apparent it's a tool. It's just something that was made by the operator.
Specifically for a task that if you gave them the right thing to do, they would have made it.
That's right. And so then, then they explained it and it always made sense. And there was always like a risk associated with it. And they were either trying to protect themselves or work around something that had to be done that nobody had paid attention to was a failure in that particular piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you wonder, what was the path of them not being able to get that made as an engineered solution? What's the relationship between the workforce and the frontline supervisors and managers that they feel to protect themselves or to protect the equipment or to protect the quality that they need to create this thing that then doesn't become a part of the way the organization does business.
And I think some of it starts with, contrary to what a lot of people like to say about employees, I believe employees always want to do the right thing. I believe that they start always in a place of, this is my job, I want to perform it well. And so I'm going to figure out how to do that well. And yes, maybe there's not a culture, a system, a process, or lack of knowledge that there even might be one for whatever reasons, that there's a better way that this could be accomplished. And it's not on you. It's not on you as an individual to try to figure this out. And thank you for wanting to do great work. Thank you for wanting to be able to show up and perform. And let's work together,
I remember years and years, probably 20, 25 years ago now, was doing a tour of a manufacturing facility, and I observed a worker just getting railed because they didn't hide that tool well enough.
Mhm.
and it got seen
Mhm.
by some of the leaders that were making a tour,
Mhm.
and somebody got asked about it. And instead of the
Mhm.
local leadership explaining, this is what we use to do this, or letting the workforce explain it,
Yeah.
they gave the workers some time off because they were told to clean up the area and make sure that nothing untoward could be found.
Yeah.
And so, this individual is getting punished for using a tool the supervisor knows they're using
Yeah.
to do a task that, we say, if you think about the mental models and performance modes, anytime you use a homemade tool or something that wasn't specifically designed for a function,
Mhm.
you're not doing that in rule-based performance mode where the error rate's 1 in 100. You're doing it in knowledge-based performance mode where the error rate is somewhere between 10 and 50%. That's why
Yeah.
so many people get hurt using pry bars, and
Yep.
so just
Yep.
outlawing them without giving a better engineered solution, that's
Mhm.
not the right thing to do.
That's
But
right.
you're absolutely right. The workers are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to do the best thing for the organization, for the equipment, and for themselves.
Mhm.
And if you go in with a attitude other than that,
Mhm.
you're not going to be a learning organization.
Mhm.
You're going to constantly look at all
Mhm.
of the data that your software provides
Yeah.
in a way that says, I'm just looking for the ways that the workers are trying to screw us,
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
the ways that the workers have to adapt
Yeah.
to the systems we've put them in
That's
that
right.
we could learn from.
That's right. That's right. So much there. So
Yeah,
much there. It's a work of a lifetime.
it is. It
Mhm.
is. And I love the opportunity to do this every day.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
I'm sure you feel some of the same in your position because you provide the opportunity for people to do things better.
That's right. That's right. I mean, we all have our why, right? Our why of what keeps us moving. I mentioned I've been at this 29 years, and different iterations and phases of your career, you're asking yourself the reason why.
Yeah.
What's getting me out of bed every day? And I've come to understand that within me is a passion for worker justice, you know, for
Yeah.
that people to be able to have a just and safe place to work, and that they have a right to that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the most basic piece of it. And so when I look at, iterations of my career over the years, it was in different phases and places that I was working for worker justice, and right
Yeah.
now with my role at HSI, I work in support of other professionals like you and I, and that enables those professionals to provide for worker justice in their workplaces.
Yeah. Do you think that an organization has an obligation to provide worker justice?
Yeah, I mean, it's baked into the OSHA. It's baked into the act.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I I I think that on the one hand, from a regulatory perspective, it's why OSHA exists. But I also think from an ethics and a values perspective
yeah.
that we owe it to our fellow human beings
Hmm.
to be fair and just
Right,
and
right.
safe.
Yeah.
You know?
It's the quest. It's the quest of many a human, and I would like to argue should be all humans, to understand that we're all one, you
Yeah,
know. Um, and we don't always operate in we are all one. And if we did, we wouldn't have war, you know.
yeah,
We
and
wouldn't.
especially
Yeah,
today's
yeah,
environment.
yeah,
Um, social media and all these other things have made things really more divisive than more cohesive, in
yeah,
my opinion.
yeah,
That it's just so much easier to find ways that we're different.
yeah.
And
And
we
and,
need
and
to find ways
scarce.
that we're the same heart.
Yeah, and it's scarcity mentality, and all of the things.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, we are all one, but we just don't realize that. And so then we have to augment with things like laws. you
yeah.
know? Yeah. Yeah.
And look, the more you create laws, the the more you need people that all their job is to do is to make sure that the laws are followed. And that's really, we would rather be out there making sure that the system is keeping people safe and happy and healthy and well,
Mhm.
as opposed to,
Mhm.
okay, here comes another regulation down the pike.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and with that, the necessity of the regulations, I mean, too bad they have to be enforced,
Yeah,
is to inform and have people understand what those hazards are, especially as, you think about, gosh, OSHA's just over 50 years old.
right.
And we don't have, I went to the 50th birthday party for OSHA. It was during the pandemic. It was fascinating and fun to see and hear people who were on the front lines of creating the legislation and the
Yeah,
Wayback Machine. It was very interesting. Um, but you think about, people love to use these cliches of, oh, she's always changing things, or all this new stuff is happening, or I can't keep up with it, all the excuses for why you don't do things well.
yeah,
And it's so untrue, because the wheels of change at OSHA are extremely grindingly slow, and technology has continued to evolve, so we don't have laws on the books for everything.
right.
you know and so as health and safety professionals, it's our responsibility to help educate the workforce, but the employers first,
Right.
about what are those things with new technology that we have to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And I think there's many of us on the front lines of doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jill, this has been a great discussion. I just want to thank you for taking the time. I'm glad you're feeling better. I
Thank you.
hope we continue to grow this relationship and we continue to talk. I think we have so many things in common in what we think personally and the way our businesses operate. So I appreciate you coming on and telling us a little bit about yourself and spending some time with us and HSI. Do you have anything that you would want to say as kind of a parting shot to our listeners? Just whatever you want to tell them off the cuff.
Gosh. You put me on the spot,
Yeah,
Rob.
that's the
So
last one.
yeah, so I will share something that I find incredibly interesting right now. I'm just back from the National Safety Congress and Expo, and I had the opportunity to be on a panel with women, and we spoke about women in EHS. And before we did that, we surveyed almost 900 women in EHS, took our survey to talk about what it's like, what our experiences are like, what are our greatest challenges, and where do we celebrate, and where can we help the EHS profession grow, other women, other leaders, make space for people. And one of the fascinating things that I came across in preparing for that panel discussion, and what the women who took the survey indicated was their greatest challenge was pay equity.
Mm,
And from that, we're like, gosh, how do we talk about that? What should we talk about? And how do we do that? And it turns out that in this month of, well, we're in November right now, but in October, the Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel in Economics to a woman economist from Harvard. Her name is Claudia Golden. And she was awarded the Nobel for her research in women's pay and the analysis of it for the last 200 years in the United States, and all of the various reasons why it's been different, other than just saying that blanket for every 87 cents on the dollar.
right,
It's so much more nuanced than that.
right.
And then how to empower yourself to ask for what you're worth. And so I would challenge any listeners who are interested in pay equity to look up Claudia Golden's work. Her book is
Claudia
fascinating. She's
Goldman.
Claudia Golden.
Golden.
Goldin.
Okay.
Yeah. There's some great podcast with her from Freakonomics, where she did
Oh
an
yeah.
interview a while
Yeah.
ago talking about this. It's just fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Did one of the things that came up was one of the things that came up personal protective equipment that is designed specifically for men, but women are in the roles of needing this personal protective equipment. It's just not designed to fit them, or
Yeah, I mean, that it did come up a bit in our survey where people talked about the importance of it. It was a big topic of conversation at NSC. I went to the women's division luncheon and there were some PPE providers there that were talking about the things that they manufactured and how they were manufacturing them differently. That was part of the conversation there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you, Jill James, for being with us, Chief Safety Officer for HSI. Go check out their website, hsi.com. And thank everybody for listening. I hope this has been another valuable round of the Essential Leadership Cycle. And I'm Rob Fisher. And remember, intentional leadership starts with you.
Thank you, Rob.